the statues, though. I mean, I'm encouraged, and I'm sure you are, that the Culture Secretary, Lisa Fraser, is actually talking about, protecting statues. But it is still an extraordinary state of affairs that anyone needs to say this, and that we don't just throw every statue that might offend anyone who once walked past it or might one day walk past it and throw it in the river like they did in Bristol.
Absolutely. And I'd make the point that historical figures, like many of us as individuals, are complicated. And I think that there are times that you look at historical figures and the things that they've done may well even be contradictory. I think that in terms of what we've seen in recent times with the emergence of the Black Lives Matter movement, the discussion about people forcibly removing statues, even without any kind of local democratic consultation, I think that we had to address that. But I think also that there's a great deal of infantilization, that individuals are unable to come to their own independent judgment about historical figures. But I think more widely, Julia, I think that in recent times we haven't shown enough pride in our own history and heritage, and especially the contributions that we made to humankind, whether it's sort of scientific advancement, technological progress, the Industrial Revolution. I think that we have a great deal to be proud of, and I just haven't seen much of that. And I think, to be honest, I haven't seen much of that from the Conservative government in recent times.
No, indeed. And it is interesting. You mentioned, local consultation, and we know we've been showing pictures here of the statue of Colston, who basically, was responsible for a huge amount of the wealth that Bristol had, and that statue, of course, being defaced and dragged through the streets. As, by the way, police just stood by and dragged and thrown into the dock there. And it's now been put into a museum, complete with all the paint on it. But the interesting thing is that for quite some time, people who wanted to remove that statue had been, having, local voting and trying to get that through. And they didn't have the public support, which is why it hadn't happened.
Well, absolutely. And the reality is, if there's not the public support, then the statue has to remain, Julia. We live in a liberal democracy, and procedures and processes of a clearly democratic nature have to be respected. And I'd make the point, I did research myself back in 2021, when you had that rise of the BLM movement. We'd seen that in the summer of 2020. Around 1 in 6 Black British people saw removing statues as a legitimate form of protest. So it was a minority view within the Black British population. So I think that a lot of these activists, which are unruly, they don't like sticking to the rules. They're not representative of the very people that they supposedly seek to represent.
No, exactly. But my thing is, yes, you might not like that statue, but that statue is from the past, erected in the past at a time when our values were very different. The whole point is that we now do think differently, and therefore we aren't in any way going, oh, he's a wonderful guy and he made money from the slave trade. I mean, I don't think we'll come across anyone who thinks that that's good or something to celebrate. But the point was that if statue was erected at a different time, and we would erect statues of a different kind now to different people for different reasons. That's what's called progress. When we erase our history, when we attempt to say that never happened, we make it, I think, even harder to show progress, don't we? It's almost like pretending that we're starting at year zero, and this isn't good enough now, as opposed to saying, wow, our country is so much better than it was, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 100 years ago, 200 years ago. And as Rishi Sunak said in his speech to the Tory party conference, the fact that it's not just that he's the first Asian Prime Minister of this country, it's the fact that it wasn't a big deal.